The morning mist clung to the surface of Crystal Lake like a shroud, its tendrils dancing in the early September breeze that swept down from the towering peaks of the Colorado Rockies. Park Ranger Miguel Santos adjusted his wide-brimmed hat and squinted through the fog, watching as the search and rescue team prepared their diving equipment on the rocky shoreline. It was supposed to be a routine recovery operation, retrieving camping gear that had fallen from an overturned canoe the previous week. What they would find instead would reopen one of Colorado's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. 8 years had passed since 26-year-old Emma Hartwell disappeared during a school field trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. The bright-eyed biology teacher from Jefferson High School in Denver had been leading a group of 30 sophomore students on what should have been a routine 3-day environmental education expedition. The trip was meant to culminate their semester-long study of alpine ecosystems, giving the teenagers hands-on experience with the very concepts they had been learning in their textbooks. Emma had been the kind of teacher that students remembered long after graduation. With her infectious enthusiasm for the natural world and her ability to make even the most reluctant learners excited about photosynthesis and food webs, she had quickly become one of the most beloved faculty members at Jefferson High. Her colleagues often found her staying late, preparing elaborate lesson plans or helping struggling students with extra tutoring sessions. She had only been teaching for 3 years, but already the principal, Mrs. Chen, was considering her for the department head position. The field trip had been Emma's idea, a culmination of months of planning and coordination with the National Park Service. She had secured permits, arranged transportation, coordinated with parent volunteers, and even convinced the school board to approve the modest budget required for the expedition. Everything had been meticulously planned, from the educational stations along the hiking trails to the evening campfire discussions about conservation and environmental stewardship. On that crisp October morning 8 years ago, the yellow school bus had pulled away from Jefferson High School at 6 in the morning, carrying 30 excited teenagers, Emma and 2 parent chaperones, Mark Davidson and Sarah Phillips. The students chattered excitedly as they wound their way through the foothills, watching the landscape transform from urban sprawl to towering pine forests and granite peaks that seemed to scrape the belly of the sky. The first day had gone perfectly. Emma led the group along the Bear Lake Trail, stopping frequently to point out examples of adaptation and symbiosis. The students collected water samples from alpine streams, identified native plant species, and marveled at the way the ecosystem changed with elevation. They set up camp at the designated backcountry site near Mills Lake, and that evening, as the stars emerged in the crystalline mountain air, Emma had led them in discussions about their place in the natural world. It was on the second day that everything began to unravel. The group had planned to hike to Alberta Falls, a moderate trek that would allow them to study the effects of water erosion on the local geology. Emma had checked the weather forecast obsessively in the days leading up to the trip, but mountain weather is notoriously unpredictable, and by mid-morning dark clouds were already beginning to gather around the peaks. The first snowflakes began to fall just as they reached the falls. What had started as a light dusting quickly intensified into a full-blown early-season blizzard. The temperature plummeted, and visibility dropped to mere yards. Emma made the decision to turn back immediately, but the storm had moved in faster than anyone anticipated. The familiar trail markers became obscured by swirling snow, and what should have been a straightforward return to camp became a disorienting struggle against the elements. It was during this retreat that Emma was last seen. According to the statements given by the chaperones and students, she had been bringing up the rear of the group, making sure no one fell behind. The wind was howling through the pines with such ferocity that conversation was nearly impossible. When they finally reached what they believed to be their campsite, a quick head count revealed the unthinkable. Emma was missing. The search began immediately, despite the worsening conditions. Mark Davidson, an experienced outdoorsman who had volunteered for the trip specifically because of his wilderness expertise, retraced their steps while Sarah Phillips stayed with the students. The teenagers huddled in their tents, frightened and confused, as the adults attempted to organize a search in conditions that were rapidly becoming dangerous for everyone involved. Park rangers were contacted via emergency radio, and within hours, a full-scale search and rescue operation was underway. The storm continued for 3 days, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow on the high country and making aerial searches impossible. Ground teams combed every accessible trail, ravine, and shelter, but found no trace of Emma Hartwell. It was as if she had simply vanished into the swirling white void of the Colorado wilderness. The official search continued for 2 weeks, involving hundreds of volunteers, multiple agencies, and every resource the state could muster. Dogs were brought in to follow scent trails, but the snow had covered any tracks or evidence that might have led to Emma's location. Helicopters scoured the rugged terrain once the weather cleared, and technical rescue teams rappelled into seemingly inaccessible canyons and crevices. The effort was unprecedented in scope and intensity, driven not only by the hope of finding Emma alive, but by the profound impact her disappearance had on the community. Emma's parents, Robert and Linda Hartwell, had driven up from their home in Colorado Springs the moment they received the call. They spent those agonizing weeks at a command post set up near the park entrance, clinging to hope as each day brought new search areas and new possibilities. Robert, a retired engineer, pored over topographic maps with the search coordinators, suggesting areas that might have been overlooked. Linda, a nurse, helped coordinate the volunteers who had come from across the state to help in the search effort. The students from Jefferson High were evacuated the day after Emma's disappearance, but many of them returned with their families to join the search efforts. These teenagers, who had been chatting excitedly about college applications and homecoming dances just days before, now found themselves confronting the harsh reality that their beloved teacher might never be coming home. Several of them would later say that those weeks forever changed their perspective on life and their relationship with the natural world Emma had taught them to love. As the days turned into weeks with no sign of Emma, theories began to emerge. Some suggested she had become disoriented in the storm and had fallen into one of the many hidden crevasses that dotted the high country. Others proposed that she might have sought shelter in a cave or overhang and had become trapped by falling snow. A few even speculated about the possibility of an encounter with wildlife, though such incidents were extremely rare in the park. The investigation expanded beyond the immediate search area. Emma's personal life was scrutinized for any clues that might explain her disappearance. Her apartment in Denver was searched, her phone records examined, and her friends and colleagues interviewed extensively. What emerged was the portrait of a dedicated teacher with no known enemies, no financial troubles, and no history of mental health issues that might have led to self-harm. She had been planning a camping trip with her sister for the following month, and had just signed a lease renewal for her apartment. Every indication was that Emma had been looking forward to her future, making her disappearance all the more baffling. The media coverage was intense but respectful. Emma's story captured the public imagination, partly because of her youth and the tragic circumstances of her disappearance, but also because of the way her students and colleagues spoke about her. The local news stations ran features about her innovative teaching methods and her dedication to environmental education. National news outlets picked up the story, and for several weeks, Emma's face was familiar to viewers across the country. As winter deepened and the search areas became inaccessible, the official efforts were scaled back, though they never completely stopped. Robert and Linda Hartwell hired private investigators and organized civilian search groups that continued to comb the wilderness throughout the following spring and summer. They offered a substantial reward for any information leading to Emma's discovery, and tips poured in from across the region. Each lead was investigated thoroughly, but none provided the breakthrough the family desperately sought. The first anniversary of Emma's disappearance was marked by a memorial service at Jefferson High School. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, families, and community members who had been touched by the search efforts. Emma's sister, Claire, spoke about her sister's passion for teaching and her belief that education could change the world. The principal announced the establishment of the Emma Hartwell Environmental Education Scholarship, which would help students pursue studies in conservation and environmental science. As the years passed, the intensity of the search efforts naturally diminished, but Emma's case was never officially closed. Her parents continued to organize annual searches, usually coinciding with the anniversary of her disappearance. Park rangers remained vigilant for any signs that might lead to her discovery, and hikers throughout the region were aware of her story and kept an eye out for anything that might provide a clue to her fate. The impact on the students who had been on that fateful trip was profound and lasting. Many of them struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering if they could have done something differently to prevent Emma's disappearance. Some abandoned their plans to pursue careers in education or environmental science, feeling that the wilderness had somehow betrayed them. Others were inspired by Emma's memory to dedicate their lives to conservation and outdoor education, seeing it as a way to honor their lost teacher. Jefferson High School implemented new policies for field trips, requiring additional safety protocols and communication systems. The environmental science program continued, but the ambitious multi-day expeditions that Emma had championed were replaced with day trips and classroom-based learning. Some faculty members felt that the school's response was overly cautious, but the administration was determined to prevent any similar incidents. The local community was also deeply affected by Emma's disappearance. Many residents became involved in search and rescue training, wanting to be better prepared to help if such a situation arose again. The annual Emma Hartwell Memorial Hike became a tradition, with hundreds of people walking the trail where she was last seen, both to honor her memory and to maintain awareness of her unsolved case. Over the years, there were occasional developments that renewed hope and media attention. Hikers would occasionally find pieces of equipment or clothing that might have belonged to Emma, but forensic analysis never confirmed a connection. There were reported sightings in various parts of Colorado and neighboring states, but investigation always revealed cases of mistaken identity. Each false lead was heartbreaking for the Hartwell family, but they never gave up hope that someday they would learn the truth about their daughter's fate. The case took on an almost mythical quality in the outdoor community. Emma's story was shared around campfires and at trailheads, serving as both a cautionary tale about wilderness safety and a reminder of the unpredictable power of nature. Some hikers reported feeling a presence on the trails where she had last been seen, though park officials attributed such accounts to the power of suggestion and the emotional weight of the location. Detective Sarah Morrison of the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office had been assigned to Emma's case from the beginning. Over the years, she had followed every lead, no matter how unlikely, and had become personally invested in finding answers for the Hartwell family. She kept Emma's file active on her desk, reviewing it regularly for details that might have been overlooked. Morrison had worked dozens of missing person cases throughout her career, but Emma's disappearance haunted her in a way that was difficult to explain. As technology advanced, Morrison made sure that Emma's case benefited from every new development in forensic science and search techniques. DNA databases were checked regularly for any matches to evidence from the search areas. Satellite imagery was analyzed for anomalies that might indicate human activity in remote areas. Even social media was monitored for any posts or images that might contain clues about Emma's whereabouts. The 8th anniversary of Emma's disappearance had passed just a few weeks before that September morning, when Park Ranger Miguel Santos received the call about the diving operation at Crystal Lake. The lake, located in a remote section of the park, accessible only by a challenging 8-mile hike, was not part of the original search area. At the time of Emma's disappearance, investigators had focused their efforts on the more direct routes between her last known location and potential shelter areas. Crystal Lake, while beautiful, was considered too far off the established trails to be a likely destination for someone seeking emergency shelter. The diving team had been contracted by the Park Service to recover equipment from a canoe that had capsized the previous week. 2 experienced kayakers had been caught in an unexpected windstorm and had been forced to abandon their gear when their canoe overturned in the lake's surprisingly deep waters. The equipment was expensive and potentially harmful to the lake's ecosystem if left to degrade on the bottom, so the recovery operation had been approved despite the remote location and logistical challenges involved. Lead diver Jennifer Walsh had been working underwater recovery operations in Colorado for over 15 years. She had seen everything from lost fishing gear to complete vehicles, and she approached each job with professional efficiency. The water in Crystal Lake was crystal clear, living up to its name, but it was also surprisingly deep for an alpine lake, reaching depths of over 60 feet in some areas. The cold mountain water preserved whatever sank to the bottom, creating an underwater museum of lost items from decades of park visitors. As Walsh descended toward the lake bottom, following the coordinates provided by the kayakers who had lost their equipment, she immediately spotted the overturned canoe and scattered gear. The recovery would be straightforward, requiring several trips to bring everything to the surface. It was during her second descent that she noticed something that didn't belong with the recent camping equipment. Partially buried in the sediment near a fallen log was what appeared to be a leather-bound book, its edges darkened by years of submersion, but still intact thanks to the lake's cold, low-oxygen environment. Walsh's first instinct was to leave the book undisturbed and report the finding to park authorities. In her experience, anything found in the backcountry could potentially be evidence related to missing persons cases or other investigations. However, as she moved closer to examine the object, she could see writing on the cover that was still partially legible, despite its long submersion. The name Emma was clearly visible in faded ink, along with what appeared to be a date from 8 years earlier. The significance of the discovery hit Walsh immediately. Like most Colorado outdoor enthusiasts, she was familiar with Emma Hartwell's story. The name, the date, and the location all pointed to an incredible possibility. This could be Emma's journal from the ill-fated field trip. Walsh carefully photographed the journal's position and the surrounding area before gently lifting it from the lake bottom and placing it in a waterproof evidence bag. The ascent to the surface seemed to take forever, though Walsh knew she had to maintain proper decompression protocols despite her excitement about the discovery. When she finally broke the surface and swam to the rocky shoreline where the recovery team was waiting, her voice was tight with emotion as she called Ranger Santos over to examine her find. Santos immediately recognized the potential importance of the discovery. He had been working in the park for over 12 years and had participated in the original search for Emma. The possibility that this journal might belong to the missing teacher sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He immediately contacted his supervisor and initiated the chain of custody procedures that would ensure the journal could be properly examined and analyzed. Within hours, the journal was on its way to the State Crime Laboratory in Denver, where forensic specialists would attempt to preserve and analyze its contents. The submersion in the cold mountain lake had actually helped preserve the journal better than if it had been exposed to the elements on the surface. The leather cover had protected the pages inside, and while some damage was inevitable after 8 years underwater, there was hope that much of the content would be recoverable. Detective Morrison received the call about the journal discovery while she was reviewing cold cases at her desk. The coincidence seemed almost impossible. After 8 years of searching, a routine equipment recovery had uncovered what might be the first concrete evidence of Emma's fate. Morrison immediately drove to the laboratory to personally oversee the preservation process and to be present when the journal was first opened. The forensic team worked with painstaking care to separate the journal's waterlogged pages and preserve their contents. Advanced imaging techniques were used to enhance faded ink and reveal text that might not be immediately visible to the naked eye. The process took several days, during which Morrison found it difficult to concentrate on anything else. The possibility that Emma's own words might finally explain what had happened to her was both exciting and terrifying. When the lab technicians finally gave Morrison permission to examine the journal's contents, she found herself holding her breath as she read the first entry. The handwriting was definitely Emma's, confirmed by comparison with samples from her apartment and school materials. The journal began with her preparations for the field trip, detailing her excitement about sharing the wilderness experience with her students and her hopes for how the expedition would enhance their understanding of environmental science. The early entries painted a picture of a teacher completely in her element. Emma wrote about her students' enthusiasm as they hiked through the changing aspen groves, their wonder at seeing elk in their natural habitat, and their thoughtful questions about the interconnectedness of mountain ecosystems. Her writing revealed both her deep knowledge of the natural world and her genuine affection for the teenagers in her care. As Morrison read through the journal, she began to understand the timeline of events more clearly than ever before. Emma had been keeping detailed notes not just about the educational aspects of the trip, but also about weather conditions, wildlife sightings, and the group's progress along their planned route. The entries revealed that she had been concerned about the weather forecast, but had felt confident in her preparations and the safety protocols they had established. The entry for the second day of the trip, the day Emma disappeared, provided the most crucial information. Her handwriting became more hurried as she described the rapidly deteriorating weather conditions and her decision to turn the group back toward camp. She had been worried about the safety of her students, particularly a few who were struggling with the pace and the cold. Her last entries revealed that she had been bringing up the rear of the group, as the chaperones had testified, but she had also been increasingly concerned about their route. According to the journal, Emma had noticed that the group had taken a wrong turn in the confusion of the storm. While the chaperones and students believed they were heading back to camp, Emma realized they were actually moving away from their designated campsite and toward a more dangerous area of the park. She had tried to signal the leaders of the group, but the wind and snow made communication nearly impossible. The final entries in the journal revealed Emma's desperate decision to leave the group and attempt to find the correct route back to camp. She knew the area well from her pre-trip scouting and believed she could quickly locate the proper trail and then guide the group to safety. It was a decision born of her sense of responsibility for her students' welfare, but it was also the choice that would seal her fate. Emma wrote that she had marked her position and intended to follow a game trail that she believed would lead her to a vantage point where she could see the correct route. She planned to be away from the group for no more than 30 minutes, just long enough to get her bearings and return with clear directions. She had no way of knowing that the game trail would lead her in the wrong direction, away from both the group and the established hiking trails. The journal entries became increasingly desperate as Emma realized she had become lost. The storm had intensified, and the snow was falling so heavily that she could barely see more than a few feet in any direction. She had attempted to retrace her steps, but the falling snow had obscured her tracks almost immediately. Her compass readings seemed inconsistent, possibly due to the metallic mineral deposits in the area that could affect magnetic navigation. As night fell on that second day, Emma had found herself alone in the wilderness with inadequate shelter and no way to signal for help. Her journal entries from that first night revealed her fear, but also her determination to survive and reunite with her students. She had found a small overhang of rock that provided some protection from the wind and snow, and she had used her emergency supplies to create a makeshift shelter. The journal revealed that Emma had survived for several more days in the wilderness, fighting against hypothermia, dehydration, and the psychological stress of being completely lost in an increasingly hostile environment. Her entries became shorter and less coherent as exhaustion and exposure took their toll, but they continued to reveal her unwavering concern for her students and her desperate hope that she would be found. On the fourth day, Emma wrote about hearing the sounds of search helicopters in the distance, but her location in a narrow valley surrounded by high ridges meant that she was invisible from the air. She had attempted to signal the aircraft by waving bright clothing and even starting a small fire, but the smoke had been dispersed by the wind before it could rise above the tree line. Emma's final coherent journal entry described her decision to leave her shelter and attempt to reach higher ground where she might be more visible to search aircraft. She had become increasingly weak from lack of food and the constant stress of fighting the cold, but she knew that staying hidden in the valley would likely mean death. She wrote about her love for her family, her students, and her dedication to teaching, expressing hope that even if she didn't survive, her story might somehow inspire others to appreciate and protect the natural world she had devoted her life to studying. The last pages of the journal were difficult to read, both because of water damage and because Emma's handwriting had become increasingly erratic as hypothermia affected her coordination and cognitive function. Fragment sentences revealed her growing confusion and disorientation, but also her continued fighting spirit. Even as she faced her own mortality, she was still thinking about the lessons she wanted to share with her students about resilience, adaptation, and the power of human determination. Detective Morrison found herself in tears as she read Emma's final words, written in a shaky hand that revealed the young teacher's desperate struggle against the elements. The journal painted a picture of a brave, dedicated educator who had made a fatal mistake born out of love for her students and responsibility for their safety. Her decision to leave the group had been the wrong choice, but it had been motivated by the same caring nature that had made her such an effective teacher. The discovery of the journal answered many questions about Emma's disappearance, but it also raised new ones. How had the journal ended up in Crystal Lake, several miles from where Emma had last been seen? The lake was not along any of the routes she had described in her writings, and it seemed unlikely that she could have traveled that far in her weakened condition. Morrison began to develop theories about Emma's final movements, but she knew that without finding Emma's remains, many questions would remain unanswered. The location where the journal was found suggested that Emma might have reached the lake during her final attempt to find help. Crystal Lake sits in a small basin surrounded by steep ridges, and it's possible that Emma, in her disoriented state, had descended into the basin thinking it might lead to a way out of the wilderness. The lake would have been frozen when Emma reached it, and she might have attempted to cross the ice to reach what appeared to be easier terrain on the opposite shore. If Emma had fallen through thin ice while attempting to cross the lake, it would explain how her journal had ended up on the lake bottom, while her body remained unrecovered. The cold water would have quickly led to drowning, and the body might have been carried by underwater currents to a location where it became trapped or buried in sediment. The journal, being lighter and more buoyant, might have floated for some time before eventually sinking to where it was discovered 8 years later. Morrison immediately authorized a comprehensive search of Crystal Lake and the surrounding area. Divers conducted a systematic survey of the lake bottom, looking for any other evidence that might be connected to Emma's disappearance. The search was methodical and thorough, covering every section of the lake in a grid pattern that would ensure nothing was missed. While the underwater search continued, teams of investigators combed the shoreline and the approaches to the lake, looking for any signs that Emma had been in the area. The terrain was challenging, with steep slopes covered in loose rock and dense vegetation that would have made travel difficult even under ideal conditions. For someone suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion, the area would have been nearly impossible to navigate safely. The search teams did find some evidence that supported the theory of Emma's presence at the lake. Small pieces of fabric caught on branches along what might have been a descent route were consistent with the type of outdoor clothing Emma had been wearing at the time of her disappearance. More significantly, they found the remains of what appeared to be an emergency shelter constructed from branches and pine boughs in a small protected area near the lake's eastern shore. The makeshift shelter was analyzed by experts in wilderness survival and compared to the techniques described in Emma's journal entries. The construction methods and materials were consistent with someone who had basic outdoor skills but was working under desperate circumstances. Carbon dating of the organic materials confirmed that the shelter had been built approximately 8 years earlier, strongly suggesting a connection to Emma's disappearance. The discovery of the journal and the evidence at Crystal Lake finally provided the Hartwell family with some answers about their daughter's fate, though it also confirmed their worst fears. Robert and Linda Hartwell had maintained hope for 8 years that Emma might somehow still be alive, perhaps suffering from amnesia, or being held somewhere against her will. The journal made it clear that Emma had died in the wilderness, alone and afraid, despite her brave efforts to survive and return to her students. The family held a private memorial service at Crystal Lake, traveling the challenging 8-mile hike to the remote location where Emma had spent her final days. They were accompanied by Detective Morrison, Ranger Santos, and several of Emma's former colleagues and students who had never given up hope of finding answers about their beloved teacher's disappearance. The service was simple but deeply moving, with participants sharing memories of Emma and reading passages from her journal that revealed her strength, compassion, and dedication to education. Emma's sister Claire spoke about how the journal had revealed the true character of her sister's final days. Rather than being a story of defeat and tragedy, Emma's own words painted a picture of someone who had faced impossible circumstances with courage and grace. Even in her darkest moments, Emma had remained true to the values that had defined her life: love for her students, respect for the natural world, and an unwavering determination to make a positive difference in the lives of others. The students who had been on the original field trip, now adults with careers and families of their own, found some measure of closure in learning about Emma's fate. Many of them had carried guilt for 8 years, wondering if they could have somehow prevented their teacher's disappearance. The journal made it clear that Emma's decision to leave the group had been her own choice, motivated by her love for them and her sense of responsibility for their safety. Several of Emma's former students had gone on to pursue careers in education, environmental science, and search and rescue, inspired by their teacher's example and determined to honor her memory through their work. The discovery of the journal reinforced their commitment to these fields and provided them with a deeper understanding of the person who had inspired their career choices. The environmental science program at Jefferson High School underwent a renaissance following the discovery of Emma's journal. The administration, recognizing the educational value of Emma's story and her dedication to outdoor learning, approved a new curriculum that included carefully planned wilderness experiences designed to honor Emma's teaching philosophy while maintaining the highest safety standards. The Emma Hartwell Memorial Scholarship was expanded to support not only college-bound students, but also teacher training programs for those who wanted to follow in Emma's footsteps. Detective Morrison officially closed Emma's missing person case, though she continued to coordinate periodic searches of the Crystal Lake area in hopes of recovering Emma's remains. The journal had provided answers about Emma's disappearance, but Morrison felt that the family deserved the closure that would come with being able to lay Emma to rest properly. The searches were conducted with volunteer teams and were always timed to minimize environmental impact in the sensitive alpine ecosystem. The story of Emma's journal discovery became national news, bringing renewed attention to wilderness safety and the importance of emergency preparedness for outdoor educators. The National Park Service used Emma's case as a teaching tool, developing new protocols for school groups and emphasizing the critical importance of staying together during emergency situations. Emma's tragic mistake in leaving her group became a cautionary tale that would hopefully prevent similar incidents in the future. Parks across the country implemented new requirements for educational field trips, including mandatory emergency communication devices, additional safety training for trip leaders, and more detailed contingency planning for severe weather events. While some educators worried that the new regulations would make outdoor education more difficult to organize, most recognized that Emma's story demonstrated the need for better preparation and risk management. The discovery of the journal also sparked interest from researchers studying wilderness survival and the psychology of decision-making under extreme stress. Emma's detailed documentation of her thoughts and actions during her ordeal provided valuable insights into how people respond to life-threatening situations and how training and preparation can influence survival outcomes. Her case became part of the curriculum at wilderness medicine schools and search and rescue training programs. Years later, hikers still leave flowers and notes at Crystal Lake, creating an informal memorial to Emma Hartwell and her dedication to education. The lake has become a pilgrimage site for teachers and outdoor educators who want to honor Emma's memory and reflect on the risks and rewards of sharing the natural world with students. The memorial visits are always conducted with respect for the wilderness environment that Emma loved and died trying to navigate. The journal itself was eventually returned to the Hartwell family after all forensic analysis was completed. They donated it to the National Park Service archives, where it serves as both a historical document and an educational resource. Researchers continue to study Emma's writings, not only for insights into her disappearance but also for her observations about alpine ecology and her innovative approaches to environmental education. Emma's story has been told in documentaries, books, and educational materials that emphasize both the importance of wilderness safety and the dedication of teachers who go above and beyond to inspire their students. Her journal entries have been quoted in teacher training programs and environmental education courses, serving as examples of passionate, committed teaching, even in the face of impossible circumstances. The Crystal Lake area where Emma spent her final days has been designated as part of the Emma Hartwell Memorial Wilderness Education Area, protecting the ecosystem she studied and ensuring that future generations of students will have opportunities to learn about the natural world and the environment she loved. The designation includes funding for educational programs and research that continue Emma's work of fostering understanding and appreciation for alpine ecosystems. Today, nearly a decade after her disappearance, Emma Hartwell's influence continues to be felt throughout the educational and outdoor communities. Her story serves as both inspiration and warning, reminding educators of the profound impact they can have on their students while emphasizing the critical importance of safety in outdoor education. The journal that was recovered from the depths of Crystal Lake has given Emma a voice that continues to teach, inspire, and protect others, long after her death in the Colorado wilderness she loved so much. The morning mist still clings to Crystal Lake on September mornings, and park rangers like Miguel Santos continue their work of protecting both the wilderness and the people who come to experience its beauty. Emma's story has become part of the landscape itself, a reminder that the mountains are both magnificent and dangerous, and that the price of loving the wilderness can sometimes be higher than anyone imagines. But her words, preserved by the cold mountain water and recovered by chance 8 years after her disappearance, ensure that her passion for teaching and her love for the natural world will continue to inspire others for generations to come.